I was attending a speech some time ago in Washington, D.C. on the favorite topic of doing business in Africa. And that's a big topic. And all these top executives, CEOs, chairmen of firms, and so forth, stood up and spoke about corruption in Africa, crime in Africa, financial risk, rates of return, Ebola. And at the question and answers session, a very distinguished gentleman, he just stood up and he said, I have no questions. I just have one comment. And that is, Africa is not Africa. Africa is 54 countries. So everybody sort of stood quiet for just a minute. I later found out that this gentleman was a former prime minister of a West African country. And little did he know that he would also become the inspiration of this TED Talk. Well, I took the Prime Minister's words to mean that the common understanding of Africa as a singularity, a single continent, or country as some people think it is, with a common people, with a common set of problems, is definitely a very false picture. Africa is like a kaleidoscope. You know, when you were a kid, you had a kaleidoscope and you looked through all these images. It is rich. It's a dynamic mosaic of cultures, of people, of languages, of wildlife, of history. Yes, it has its problems, but indeed it has a lot of successes. It's dynamic. It's changing every day, every minute. So, what is Africa? Well, in my opinion, Africa is not what we read in these books written by non-Africans. Perhaps the real story really has not been told yet. Many people say that Africans have not done a very good job in telling their own story. Much of the history is yet undocumented. So I believe that it is extremely important that we look at the facts, as Winston Churchill once said, because if not, the facts, will look at you. So let me give you just a couple of facts, just to name a few. Of course, it's 54 countries and not one. Its population has reached about 1 billion, if not a little bit more. And how can we disregard on this planet 1 billion people? Think about that. The median age, as everybody's talking about, middle millenniums, is from 15 to about 32. And that's the future. It has a wealth of resources. Of course, all the resources that we all know about, the oil, the gas, the diamonds, the gold. But it has a lot of rare earth resources. All of these minerals that go into all these phones that every one of us carry. So, how did I start this journey in the continent? Well, I was invited to Ghana about 20 years or so ago. And it was a country that I really didn't know. Never really had paid any attention to Ghana. In a continent that I had just seen in these magnificent pictures of National Geographic. And as soon as I arrived, I just had put my foot on the from the plane a couple of hours. And I realized that there were such similarities with the Calabria, a region in southern Italy where I've spent many of my formative years. the traditions, the rituals, the weddings, the funerals, the proverbs, and indeed the red pepper. It was the same red pepper that I remember as a little child they gave to us to keep us quiet for a couple of hours. Well, I was lucky because I was received by the president of the country at that time. And instantaneously, I was introduced to the facts of life, of Ghana, of West Africa, of the continent, indeed, of the world, through a very Ghanaian perspective. And I was really enthused. I was energized. And as I returned home, I was ready to tell all the investors and my colleagues that, look, the sky is the limit in Ghana, and maybe in West Africa. Maybe we should go further and explore other countries. Soon enough, didn't take a long time, soon enough, people were indifferent. They really almost didn't care. They had a lot of mistrust in what I was saying, except for a couple of my colleagues that I'm still working with today from those days. And this indifference came from all these negative economic indicators and credit rating agencies, the same ones, by the way, that gave this clean bill of health to the subprime mortgage operators, as a matter of fact. And I remember having to take a colleague and friend, a very successful one at that, from Africa to some investment groups overseas, these sort of what they call these pony shows and so forth on certain projects. And I can't tell you how these investors and others were really not even interested to listen to his project or where he was from or what he was about or his success stories. They were short of saying, look, what's your bank statement like? Like, what are you worth? Like, how many is it from 300 to 400, 500 million? I mean, it was that insensitive. So at that point, I really realized, I said to myself, the continent that I really don't know or need to know more about, I understand it. But it is my home base, the continent that I'm from, that I don't know or don't understand. That was a tremendous realization that day. So, I continued on. I continued, and I worked in the countries and so forth, and I soon realized that here I had to become a linguist, somewhat of a psychologist, a cultural translator at that, for investors that had a long-term commitment that really needed and wanted to participate in the infrastructure or in the development of African countries. But I was also very lucky because as I traveled through these countries, I really made it a point to meet with senior professionals and older politicians who had really worked hand in hand with legends like Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Kaunda, and others. And these were the people that in those days, good, bad, or indifferent with whatever historical issues that there were, formed the policies and the processes that are actually being implemented today, that people like us that go in there, that's what we are working with. And this was a tremendous understanding. As a matter of fact, about a month ago, I was in Namibia, and the great privilege of being in Namibia, and I attended the inaugural of President Hage Geingob, the third president now of Namibia. He was a tremendous leader in the Namibian freedom struggle, and that inaugural coincided with Namibia's 25-year anniversary of independence. I can't tell you how many people attended this event, from current heads of state, former heads of state, African legends. They were all there in sort of an environment like this. It was a celebration. It was like a moment of African current history just right before my eyes. And guess what? Not even, or I didn't see it at least, one international media reporter was there. Not even one. And frankly, I felt that was a bit of a disappointment. But curious as I am, Italian as we all are, Italians are very curious, I just can't stay on the surface in countries. So I not just have, older politicians and heads of state and professionals that I work with, but I have many, many friends in villages, from wise fishermen to market women, and most importantly, to these beautiful children that run through the breaches and that have energized me through the years with their beautiful smiles and pure aspiration to curiosity in things and future. And by doing that, you'd be surprised, I met my best friend, my best companion, my African mutt, Banana, who I dare say that there's any other mutt in the world that has as many frequent flyer miles as she does. And that was a tremendous thing. But let me demystify a couple of perceptions that are going around here that in the last couple of months really bothered me a bit. The first is Ebola. It hit 3 countries too many, and unfortunately, many poor people lost their lives. But unfortunately, it was 3 countries too many, but it was 3 countries. It wasn't the whole continent of Africa. Every time I came back from a trip, lately, people would say, oh, don't, you might have Ebola, you might have that. I mean, this level of ignorance is something that it really bothered me, because it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that these things are reported in such a way that people get this horrible misperception. The other thing is, and you see here a picture of Windhoek, Namibia, a very modern city. The middle classes are growing at the same paces as in China and India. There's a tremendous uplifting for the future. African countries have leapfrogged generations of technology. They've avoided the mistakes that have been made in the developing countries. They've adapted to these mistakes much better than developing countries. They have learned. They use these iPhones. They went from no phones to iPhones, and they use them, well, definitely much better than I do, because I'm not even on social media or anything like that. But as you could see from some slides from my former presenters, they are on Facebook. They are modernized. They are growing. They are the future. And definitely I can attest to the fact that an independent businesswoman can do quite well in the continent. So let me tell you a little bit about some success stories that I was particularly involved in Ghana. And if you drive 4 hours out of Accra, west down the coast, after some twists and turns, you will eventually get to a power plant. What a power plant this was. Greenfield Power Plant. This is a flagship project, the first to be built by private investment. What a challenge. Technical, legal, commercial challenge. I and my colleagues, and coupled with the colleagues in Ghana and team, we really played a significant role to get this plant put where it is right now. My job was to get all the related parties, bring them to the table, and keep them there. That was my job. It was a terrible job to do. Now, costs were escalating. Investors were getting impatient. They were, making all sorts of noise and so forth. The Ghanaian officials that were involved, and generally in these kinds of high industry projects, you're really generally dealing with government. Now, the government officials were highly skilled professionals. I mean, they really knew their work, but there were few. So they were dragged in thousands of directions, and by this point, the investors are screaming and upset, and of course the London advisors are not cheap. They were not cheap. They still are not cheap. And I can't tell you how these investors manifested their frustration. I mean, it's one day maybe I will be encouraged to go to a screenwriter and have a blockbuster movie on this. If you think that clever negotiating skills, legal, commercial, financial brilliance will pull you through a project like this, no. Not at all. Do not underestimate, when one is working in African countries in general, I can say this in general, the importance of respect. Respecting everyone. Everyone. Doesn't matter who they are, because you don't know who they are. Understanding the social, cultural fabric of that country. Your humility, your perseverance, and definitely hard work and passion. That pulls you through. So, a lot of lessons to be learned. We can talk about those all day long. Most importantly, I think you need good local partners. You need to be able to understand that you have to go the extra mile in many more ways than one. Communication is by phone, so if you don't have a local chip, you're lost. And most importantly, let me leave you with a lesson that I learned some time back. And that is, to everyone, and I guess this just doesn't happen just for the continent of Africa, but everywhere. If you close your eyes to facts, you will learn through accidents. Thank you very much for listening.